Congratulations, Nicole. You've been selected for a unique opportunity. Nicole Wintz almost spilled hot coffee all over her lap when the HR secretary appeared out of nowhere beside her desk. At 8:15 a.m. on a gray Monday morning, those words sounded more like a threat than good news. Selected for what exactly? She mumbled, still trying to process. Working as an administrative assistant at a law firm didn't usually yield unique opportunities, just endless stacks of documents and lukewarm coffee. Follow me, please. Mr. Williams is waiting. Williams? Nicole frowned. That name wasn't on the firm's partner list, but the secretary was already walking down the hallway with determined steps, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and mystery. The room she was led to was on the top floor, a place she had never set foot in during her 2 years with the company. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, and in the center, behind a mahogany desk that seemed to cost more than her annual salary, sat the most devastatingly handsome man she had ever seen in her life, and also the most intimidating. Perfectly styled black hair, eyes of an icy blue like winter, and a suit that probably cost more than her car. He analyzed her from head to toe with an expression that mixed disdain and approval. Nicole Wintz. His voice was deep, with a slight British accent that made her name sound almost sensual. Sit down. It wasn't a request. She obeyed, her legs trembling. Sorry, but I don't understand what... Silence. He slid a sealed envelope across the desk. Open it. With trembling hands, Nicole tore the cream paper. Her eyes ran through the lines of the document, and with each word, her jaw dropped further. Temporary marriage contract amount. $500,000 duration. 3 months. Location. Private property on the California coast. Is this a joke? She stammered, looking up. Richard Williams. Now she could see the name engraved on the golden plaque. Arched a perfect eyebrow. Do I look like someone who makes jokes, Miss Wintz? Definitely not. He looked like someone who ate little children for breakfast and used orphan tears as facial moisturizer. But why me? We don't even know each other. Because you're perfect for the role. His eyes swept over her again, this time slower. Common enough appearance to not draw unnecessary attention, but with a natural charm that can be enhanced. And most importantly, he leaned forward, because you need the money. Nicole's blood ran cold. How did he know about her debts? About her mother's medical bills? About the apartment she was about to lose? How did you? I have my resources. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Your mother needs expensive surgery. You have credit card debts that have tripled with interest. And your landlord has already sent 3 eviction notices. Each word was a precise stab. Nicole felt tears sting her eyes, but forced herself to maintain composure. And in exchange for pretending to be your wife for 3 months, you'd pay $500,000? Exactly. 3 months at my property in Big Sur. You'll play the role of the devoted wife for my associates. Nothing physical will be required, he added with a cold smile. Just presence and convincing performance. And if I refuse? His smile widened, but didn't reach his eyes. Then you go back to your desk, continue earning your miserable salary, and in 2 weeks, you'll be living on the street while your mother... Well, let's hope the public health system is more generous than I'm being. Nicole felt the air escape her lungs. It was pure and simple blackmail, but it was also her only chance to save everything that mattered in her life. I need to think. You have 15 seconds. Richard consulted a watch that probably cost more than a house. 14. 13? This is insane. 12. 11. You can't just... 10. 9. Her mother. The surgery. The apartment. Everything crashing down around her. 8. 7. Her hands trembled over the contract. 6. 5. Her mother's pale face in the hospital. 4. 3. All right, she screamed, grabbing the pen. I accept! Richard stopped counting, but his smile became predatory. Smart. Nicole signed her name with trembling handwriting, feeling as if she were selling her soul to the devil. And considering the man in front of her, maybe she was. Excellent. He stood up, an imposing figure against the morning light. A team will come get you tomorrow at 6 a.m. Bring only essentials. Everything else will be provided. Wait! Nicole jumped from her chair. I don't even know why you need a fake wife. And for 3 whole months? For the first time, something like genuine emotion crossed Richard's face, a flash of pain quickly masked by his usual coldness. That, my dear wife, he said, the word wife sounding like a dangerous caress. You'll discover soon enough. And then he left the room, leaving Nicole alone with a contract that would change her life forever, and the terrible suspicion that she had just made the biggest mistake, or the best choice, of her existence. Outside the window, the city continued its morning dance, oblivious to the fact that an ordinary administrative assistant had just become the temporary wife of the most dangerously attractive man she had ever met. And somewhere deep in her heart, a traitorous little voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, those 3 months wouldn't be the torture she imagined. Nicole had imagined many things about how billionaires lived, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of Richard Williams's little retreat. The helicopter ride alone had been enough to make her question every life choice that led to this moment. Sitting across from Richard in the leather-appointed aircraft, she'd tried to avoid his piercing gaze while simultaneously fighting motion sickness and the urge to jump out mid-flight. "First time in a helicopter?" he'd asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. "First time pretending to be someone's wife, too," she'd shot back, earning what might have been the ghost of a smile. Now, standing on the marble steps of what could only be described as a modern palace perched on Big Sur's dramatic coastline, Nicole wondered if she'd accidentally signed a contract with a Bond villain instead of a businessman. "Welcome to Seaview Estate," Richard said, his hand settling possessively on the small of her back. The touch sent an unwelcome shiver down her spine. "Try to look like you belong here." "Right, because I'm totally used to houses that probably have their own zip codes," she muttered. An impeccably dressed older woman appeared at the massive glass doors, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that screamed, "I've been managing rich people's problems since before you were born." "Mrs. Henderson," Richard nodded. "This is Nicole, my wife." The word wife still sounded foreign and dangerous coming from his lips. "Mrs." Henderson's sharp eyes assessed Nicole with the efficiency of a luxury goods appraiser, determining authenticity. "Ma'am," the housekeeper said with a slight curtsy that made Nicole want to disappear into the marble floor. "Oh, please don't. I mean, just Nicole is fine," she stammered. Richard's hand tightened slightly on her back. "My wife is still adjusting to the formalities," he said smoothly. "Mrs. Henderson runs the household. Whatever you need, ask her." "Very good, sir. The master suite has been prepared, and your guests will arrive for dinner tomorrow evening." Guests. Right. The mysterious associates, who were the whole reason for this elaborate charade. Nicole still had no idea who these people were, or why Richard needed a wife to impress them, but something told her she'd find out soon enough. "Excellent. Show Nicole to our room, please. I have calls to make." "Our room." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Wait, what?" Richard paused, turning back with that infuriatingly calm expression. "Did you think we'd have separate bedrooms? These people need to believe we're married, Nicole. Married couples share beds. But you said nothing physical would be required," he finished. "I assure you I can control myself. The question is, can you?" The arrogance in his voice made her want to slap that perfect face. Instead, she lifted her chin defiantly. "I think I'll manage to resist your overwhelming charm." This time he definitely smiled, and the effect was devastatingly unfair. "We'll see." Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat diplomatically. "Perhaps I should show you to your room now, Mrs. Williams." Mrs. Williams. Nicole's stomach did a little flip at hearing the name. This was really happening. The master suite was larger than her entire apartment back home, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the Pacific Ocean. A massive king-sized bed dominated the room, its pristine white linens looking like a battleground where her sanity would likely meet its end. "Your clothes have been arranged in the walk-in closet," Mrs. Henderson said, opening a door that revealed a space the size of a boutique. "Mr. Williams took the liberty of having a wardrobe selected for you." Nicole stepped inside and nearly choked. Designer dresses, shoes, lingerie, everything perfectly organized by color and style. The price tags on any single item probably exceeded her monthly rent. "This is a lot," she managed. "Mr. Williams is very particular about appearances," Mrs. Henderson said, with what might have been sympathy. "Dinner is served at 7. I've left appropriate options on the bed." Alone in the opulent room, Nicole sank onto the edge of the bed and tried to process her new reality. Through the windows, the sun was beginning to set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that would have been romantic under different circumstances. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "How's the new job, honey? The doctors say the surgery can wait another week, so don't worry about me." Nicole's eyes filled with tears. Her mother had no idea her daughter was currently sitting in a billionaire's bedroom, pretending to be his wife to pay for the very surgery she was trying not to worry about. Having second thoughts? Nicole jumped, spinning around to find Richard leaning against the doorframe, his suit jacket discarded, and his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. Somehow, this slightly disheveled version of him was even more dangerous to her equilibrium. "Just wondering what I've gotten myself into," she said honestly. "Smart woman would be wondering what she's gotten herself out of," he replied, moving into the room with that predatory grace she was beginning to recognize. "Your mother's surgery is scheduled for next week, paid in full." Nicole's heart stopped. What? But the contract says, "The money is yours regardless." "I'm not a monster, Nicole." He moved to the window, hands in his pockets, suddenly looking less like a corporate shark and more like a man carrying the weight of the world. "I just needed to ensure you'd stay for the full 3 months. Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why is this so important to you?" For a moment his mask slipped entirely, and she saw something raw and vulnerable in those icy blue eyes. Pain, loss, desperation. "Because," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the darkening horizon, "these 3 months might be the last chance I have to save everything I've worked for. And despite what you might think of me, I don't lose." The vulnerability in his voice made her chest tight. This wasn't just about business. There was something deeply personal at stake here. "Richard, get dressed," he said, the walls slamming back into place. "We're having dinner with the neighbors tonight. Consider it a practice run." He was at the door when her voice stopped him. "Thank you. For my mother, I mean." He paused without turning around. "Don't thank me yet, Nicole. You haven't earned that money." And with that cryptic warning, he was gone, leaving her alone with a closet full of designer clothes, a king-sized bed that felt like a trap, and the growing suspicion that the next 3 months would change her in ways she couldn't even imagine. Outside, the waves crashed against the cliffs below, as relentless and powerful as the man she'd agreed to call husband. The midnight blue dress Richard's stylist had selected fit Nicole like it was made for her, which it probably was. Looking at herself in the floor-to-ceiling mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The silk hugged her curves in all the right places, and the subtle makeup Mrs. Henderson had helped apply made her eyes look mysteriously luminous. "You clean up well," came Richard's voice from behind her. Nicole spun around and forgot how to breathe. If she looked good, Richard looked absolutely devastating in his charcoal suit, the fabric tailored to perfection across his broad shoulders. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd run his fingers through it, and those piercing blue eyes were doing that thing again, making her feel like he could see straight through her soul. "Don't let it go to your head," she managed, though her voice came out breathier than intended. Too late for that. He moved closer, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "You'll need this." Inside was the most beautiful ring Nicole had ever seen, a vintage Art Deco design with a central diamond surrounded by sapphires that matched Richard's eyes. It was elegant, timeless, and probably worth more than her childhood home. "Richard, this is my grandmother's ring," he said quietly, taking her left hand. "It needs to look authentic." The moment he slipped the ring onto her finger, something shifted in the air between them. The weight of it felt like a promise she wasn't sure she was ready to make, even if it was all pretend. "There," he said, but he didn't let go of her hand immediately. Instead, his thumb traced over the ring, his touch sending electricity up her arm. Perfect fit. "How did you know my size?" "I notice details, Nicole. It's what keeps me alive in my world." Before she could ask what he meant by that ominous statement, Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway. "The car is ready, sir. The Ashfords are expecting you at 8. The ride to their neighbor's house was tense with unspoken expectations. Richard had given her a crash course in their fake relationship during the 5-minute drive. They'd been married 6 months, had met at a charity auction, honeymooned in Tuscany, and were blissfully happy. "Just follow my lead," he'd said, "and try not to look terrified." "I'm not terrified," Nicole lied. "You're gripping the door handle like you're about to jump out of a moving vehicle." She forced herself to relax as they pulled up to a sprawling Mediterranean-style villa. The Ashfords, apparently, were old-money California aristocracy who'd known Richard's family for decades. Victoria Ashford greeted them at the door, a woman in her 60s with perfectly coiffed silver hair and jewelry that probably had its own insurance policy. Her husband Charles was the kind of distinguished gentleman who looked like he'd stepped out of a whiskey advertisement. "Richard, darling," Victoria air-kissed both his cheeks. "And this must be the mysterious wife we've heard absolutely nothing about." Nicole felt Richard's hand settle on her lower back, a gesture that was becoming familiar but no less unsettling. "Victoria, Charles, meet Nicole. We've been keeping things private, as you know how the press can be." Of course," Charles boomed, shaking Nicole's hand with enthusiasm. "Smart man, keeping this one under wraps. You're absolutely lovely, my dear." "Thank you," Nicole managed, hyper-aware of Richard's thumb making small circles against her back through the silk of her dress. Dinner was an elaborate affair with multiple courses and wine that probably cost more per bottle than Nicole made in a month. She found herself actually enjoying the Ashfords' company. They were surprisingly down-to-earth despite their obvious wealth, and their stories about Richard's childhood were both endearing and embarrassing. "He was such a serious little boy," Victoria was saying, gesturing with her wine glass. "Always in a suit, even at age 10. We used to joke that he was born wearing a tie." "Some things never change," Nicole said, glancing at Richard with what she hoped looked like wifely affection. "Oh, but they have," Victoria continued. "I've never seen him look so relaxed." "Marriage clearly agrees with you, Richard." Nicole felt Richard tense slightly beside her. "Nicole has a way of bringing out my better nature," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "How romantic!" Victoria clapped her hands together. "You simply must tell us how you knew she was the one." Richard's pause lasted a heartbeat too long. Nicole jumped in, surprising herself. "It was the way he looked at me," she said, turning to face Richard. "Like I was the only person in the room who mattered. Like he saw me, really saw me, when everyone else just looked through me." The words were meant to be part of their act, but as she spoke them, looking into Richard's intense gaze, they felt startlingly real. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. "And how did you know?" Charles asked Richard. Richard's gaze never left Nicole's face. "She called me on my bullshit," he said quietly. No one had ever done that before. She saw right through all the walls I'd built and wasn't impressed by any of it. She wanted the man underneath, not the fortune or the power. Just me. The table fell silent, the honesty in his voice catching everyone off guard, including Nicole. Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "Well," Victoria said finally, dabbing at her eyes, "that's the most romantic thing I've ever heard." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of compliments and curiosity about their whirlwind romance. Richard played his part perfectly, the devoted husband who couldn't keep his hands off his wife. His touch was constant but subtle, a hand on her shoulder as he passed behind her chair, fingers brushing hers as he reached for the wine, his palm warm against her back as they said their goodbyes. By the time they returned to Seaview Estate, Nicole's nerves were frayed from maintaining the charade and trying to ignore her body's traitorous response to Richard's proximity. "That went well," Richard said as they walked through the front door. "Better than I expected," Nicole admitted. "The Ashfords are lovely." "They are. And they bought it completely." "Right. It was all an act." Nicole felt foolish for the way her heart had raced during his impromptu declaration at dinner. "You're a good actress," Richard continued, loosening his tie as they climbed the marble staircase. "That bit about seeing the real you was inspired." "Thanks," she said, though the compliment felt hollow now. They reached the master suite, and suddenly the king-sized bed loomed between them like a challenge. Richard seemed to realize it at the same moment. "I'll take the couch," he said quickly. "That thing barely fits you. I've slept in worse places." Nicole studied his face, seeing exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. Whatever pressure he was under, whatever these 3 months were really about, it was taking a toll on him. "The bed is huge," she heard herself say. "We can share it, like adults." Richard's eyes darkened. "Nicole, we both need sleep, and if someone comes in..." She gestured vaguely, trying to sound practical instead of like she was desperately curious about what it would feel like to sleep next to him. After a long moment, he nodded. "Fine, but I sleep on the left side." "Deal." As they prepared for bed with careful choreography to avoid any awkward moments, Nicole caught herself wondering if this was how real marriages worked, this careful dance of intimacy and distance, of pretending not to notice while noticing everything. Lying in the dark with Richard's warm presence just inches away, she stared at the ceiling and tried to ignore the fact that somewhere between the helicopter ride and tonight's dinner, the line between pretending and reality had started to blur. And that scared her more than any contract ever could. Nicole woke to the sound of waves crashing and the distinct absence of warmth beside her. The space where Richard had slept was already cold, the sheets barely wrinkled, as if he'd barely moved all night. She, on the other hand, had apparently migrated halfway across the king-sized bed during the night, her pillow somehow ending up on what should have been his side. The clock on the nightstand read 6:47 a.m. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Pacific stretched endlessly under a pewter sky, and there on the private beach below, a lone figure was running along the shoreline. Richard. Even from this distance, she could recognize his powerful stride, the determined set of his shoulders. He was shirtless, and Nicole found herself pressing closer to the window, watching the way his muscles moved with each step. The man was built like a Greek statue, all lean strength and perfect proportions. Enjoying the view? Nicole spun around, heat flooding her cheeks. Richard stood in the doorway, sweaty and breathless from his run, a towel draped around his neck. Up close, he was even more devastating. Chest gleaming with perspiration, dark hair damp with exertion, those piercing blue eyes dancing with amusement. The ocean is beautiful, she stammered. His smile was pure wickedness as he moved toward the ensuite bathroom. Breakfast is in an hour. Mrs. Henderson left clothes on the chair. The sound of the shower starting made Nicole's imagination run wild in directions it had no business going. She forced herself to focus on getting dressed, choosing a soft cashmere sweater and designer jeans that fit better than anything she'd ever owned. When Richard emerged from the bathroom 20 minutes later, hair damp and wearing a navy button-down that hugged his frame perfectly, Nicole had to remind herself to breathe. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm with mock formality. "As I'll ever be," she replied, surprised by how natural it felt to loop her arm through his. Breakfast was served on a terrace overlooking the ocean, the morning sun finally breaking through the clouds to cast everything in golden light. Mrs. Henderson had outdone herself. Fresh fruit, artisanal pastries, perfectly prepared eggs Benedict, and coffee that smelled like heaven. "Sleep well?" Richard asked, cutting into his eggs with surgical precision. "Better than expected," Nicole admitted. "You?" "I don't sleep much." He said it casually, but she caught the shadow that crossed his face. "Bad dreams?" Richard's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Something like that." The vulnerability in his voice made her chest tight. "Want to talk about it?" "No." The wall slammed back up so fast it gave her whiplash. "We need to discuss today's schedule. The real guests arrive this evening." "Right. The mysterious associates who were the whole point of this elaborate charade." Nicole set down her coffee cup. "Are you going to tell me who they are? What this is really about?" Richard was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Have you ever heard of Blackstone Industries?" Nicole frowned. "The tech conglomerate. They're huge." "Wait." Understanding dawned. "Your family company?" "Was my family company. My father built it from nothing, turned it into an empire. When he died 5 years ago, he left it to me." Richard's jaw tightened. What he didn't tell me was that he'd made some questionable deals to keep it afloat during the recession. "What kind of deals?" "The kind that involve very dangerous people who don't accept 'I didn't know' as an excuse." Richard pushed his plate away, his appetite clearly gone. "I've been trying to untangle the mess for years, but they want their money. All of it. With interest that's compounded into an impossible sum." Nicole's blood chilled. "How much?" $50 million, due in 2 weeks. The number hit her like a physical blow. "That's why you need the associates to believe you're stable, married, settled. You're trying to secure investors. A merger, actually, with a European firm that's been courting Blackstone for months. They're conservative, old-fashioned. They won't do business with a man they see as unstable or unreliable." Richard's smile was bitter. "Apparently, my reputation as a ruthless bachelor makes them nervous. So you needed a wife to seal the deal. I needed the appearance of stability, of having something to lose. Something worth protecting. His eyes met hers across the table. The irony is that I actually do now. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Nicole's heart hammered against her ribs. Richard! Don't! He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the stone. Don't read anything into that. I meant the company. I have the company to protect. But the raw honesty in his voice suggested otherwise, and they both knew it. The rest of the morning passed in careful politeness, both of them dancing around the elephant in the room. Richard gave her a tour of the estate, the infinity pool that seemed to spill into the ocean, the wine cellar that could stock a small restaurant, the home theater with seats more comfortable than most people's beds. This place is incredible, Nicole said as they walked through the art-filled corridors. How long have you owned it? It was my father's retreat. He bought it for my mother when they were newlyweds. Richard paused in front of a portrait of a beautiful woman with kind eyes and Richard's dark hair. She died when I was 8. I'm sorry. Nicole touched his arm instinctively. She was beautiful. She was everything he wasn't. Warm, generous, trusting. She believed the best in people. Richard's voice was soft, almost wondering. I used to think that made her weak. Now I think it made her brave. You miss her. Every day. He turned away from the portrait abruptly. The guests will arrive at 6. We should prepare. That afternoon, Nicole found herself being pampered by a team of stylists who had materialized as if by magic. Her hair was swept into an elegant updo, her makeup applied with artistic precision, and she was poured into a stunning emerald green cocktail dress that made her feel like a movie star. When she descended the marble staircase that evening, Richard was waiting at the bottom in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. The look on his face when he saw her made her knees weak. You look, he started, then seemed to lose his words. Acceptable, she suggested with a nervous smile. Devastating, he said quietly. Absolutely devastating. Before she could respond, Mrs. Henderson appeared. Sir, your guests are arriving. Richard straightened, the mask of cool control sliding back into place. He offered Nicole his arm. Ready, darling wife? Ready as I'll ever be, she said, though her heart was pounding. As they walked toward the front door, Nicole caught sight of their reflection in the massive mirror that dominated the foyer. They looked perfect together. The powerful billionaire and his elegant wife, a couple who had everything. If only it were real. The sound of car doors slamming announced the arrival of their guests. Richard's hand tightened on her arm. Remember, he murmured in her ear, his breath warm against her skin. We're madly in love. Looking up into his intense blue eyes, Nicole realized that pretending to be in love with Richard Williams might be the easiest part of this whole charade. The terrifying part was that it might not be pretending at all. The European investors were nothing like Nicole had expected. Klaus Müller was a distinguished German gentleman in his 70s, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. His business partner, Henri Dubois, was younger, maybe 50, with that effortless French elegance that made expensive suits look casual. Both men radiated old-world sophistication and the kind of power that came from generations of wealth. Gentlemen, Richard said, his voice smooth as silk as he guided Nicole forward. Allow me to present my wife, Nicole. Enchanté, madame, Henri said, lifting Nicole's hand to his lips in a gesture that was somehow respectful rather than sleazy. Richard has spoken of you often. Nicole managed not to show her surprise. Only good things, I hope. Naturellement, Henri smiled. A man in love speaks of nothing else. Klaus's assessment was more direct, his gray eyes studying Nicole with businesslike efficiency. You are not what I expected, he said in accented English. Oh? Nicole raised an eyebrow, channeling every elegant woman she'd ever seen in movies. What did you expect? Someone, how do you say, more decorative, less substantial. Klaus's smile was approving. This is better. A man needs a partner, not an ornament. Richard's hand settled on the small of Nicole's back, his touch both possessive and protective. Nicole is many things, but ornamental isn't one of them. The evening that followed was like a high-stakes ballet. Richard was masterful, charming, confident, but never desperate. He discussed market projections and technological innovations with the same ease that Nicole found herself talking about art with Henri, who turned out to be a passionate collector. You have excellent taste, Henri said, admiring a Monet that dominated one wall of the dining room. Your husband mentioned you studied art history. Nicole hadn't studied art history, but she'd spent enough time in museums during her broke college years to fake it convincingly. I find that understanding beauty requires understanding the pain that created it, she said, which sounded profound enough to earn an approving nod. The real test came during dinner, when Klaus set down his wine glass and fixed Richard with a penetrating stare. Your company is impressive, Richard, but we must discuss the rumors. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Richard's expression didn't change, but Nicole felt his tension like a physical thing. Which rumors would those be, Klaus? That Blackstone Industries has certain obligations to unsavory elements. We cannot involve ourselves with anything that might attract unwanted attention. Nicole's blood turned to ice. This was it, the moment that would make or break everything. She watched Richard's face, seeing the careful calculation behind his eyes. There were some inherited complications from my father's tenure, Richard said carefully, but they've been resolved. Completely? The lie hung in the air, and Nicole knew that Klaus knew it was a lie. These men didn't get where they were by accepting easy answers. Business is messy sometimes, Nicole heard herself say. Both men turned to look at her, and she felt Richard's sharp attention, like a laser. My father was a contractor, built houses his whole life. He always said that you can't build something beautiful without getting your hands dirty first. She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on an intimate quality. Richard inherited a mess, but he spent 5 years cleaning it up. Not running from it, not hiding from it, facing it head on and doing the right thing, even when it cost him. She reached for Richard's hand, intertwining their fingers. That's the man I fell in love with. Not the fortune, not the power, the integrity. Klaus was studying her intently. And you believe he has resolved these complications? Nicole looked directly into Klaus's eyes, channeling every ounce of conviction she possessed. I believe in my husband completely, and I wouldn't have married him if I thought he was the kind of man who would bring danger into my life, into our future children's lives. The mention of children was improvised genius. Klaus's expression softened almost imperceptibly, and Henri actually smiled. Family, Klaus murmured approvingly. This is important. Richard's thumb stroked over Nicole's knuckles, and when she glanced at him, the look in his eyes made her breath catch. Gratitude, yes, but something deeper, something that looked dangerously like. Well, Henri said, breaking the spell. I think we have heard enough for tonight. Klaus? The older man nodded slowly. We will have an answer for you tomorrow, Richard. But I must say, your wife has been illuminating. After the investors retired to their guest suites, Richard walked Nicole out onto the terrace overlooking the moonlit ocean. The silence between them was charged with unspoken words. Thank you, he said finally. Don't thank me yet. We don't know if it worked. It worked. Richard turned to face her, his eyes intense in the moonlight. What you said about integrity, about believing in me, where did that come from? Nicole's heart hammered against her ribs. The honest answer was that somewhere in the past few days, she had started believing in him. The man she'd seen with his mother's portrait, the one who ran on the beach at dawn to escape his nightmares, the one who had paid for her mother's surgery without being asked. That man was worth believing in. I'm a good actress, remember? She said instead, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. Something flickered in Richard's eyes. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. Right, of course. He started to turn away, but Nicole caught his arm. Richard, wait. What? His voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the walls slamming back into place. She wanted to tell him the truth, that the performance tonight hadn't been a performance at all, that her feelings for him were becoming dangerously real, that the thought of their 3 months ending made her chest tight with panic. Instead, she chickened out. I just want you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, you've already won. You fought for your father's legacy. You protected your employees. You're doing everything right. Am I? Richard's laugh was hollow. I blackmailed you into this charade, Nicole. I'm not sure that qualifies as doing everything right. You gave me a choice, and you gave me the money to save my mother before I'd earned it. You could have waited, held it over my head for 3 months, but you didn't. That doesn't make me a good man. Maybe not, Nicole said softly, stepping closer to him. But it makes you a man worth saving. For a moment, they stood frozen in the moonlight, the air between them electric with possibility. Richard's eyes dropped to her lips, and Nicole's breath hitched. He was going to kiss her. She could see it in his eyes, feel it in the way he leaned toward her. "Mrs. Williams?" They sprang apart like guilty teenagers as Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway. "Forgive the interruption, but Mr. Miller's suite requires additional towels. I'll have them sent up immediately." "Of course," Nicole managed, her voice only slightly breathless. When Mrs. Henderson disappeared, the spell was broken. Richard had stepped back, his expression unreadable once again. "We should get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow will be a long day." As they walked back into the house, Nicole couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just missed something important, a moment that might not come again. In their shared bed that night, she lay awake listening to Richard's breathing, hyper-aware of every shift and sigh from his side of the mattress. Somewhere in the darkness, she heard him whisper her name, so softly she might have imagined it. But when she turned toward him, he was facing away, his breathing even and deep. She closed her eyes and tried to ignore the ache in her chest that felt suspiciously like heartbreak. Tomorrow would bring answers about the merger, about their future, about what would happen when their 3 months were up. Tonight, all she could do was lie in the dark and wonder when pretending to love Richard Williams had stopped being pretend at all. Nicole woke to the sound of Richard's phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. Gray morning light filtered through the windows, and beside her, Richard was already reaching for the device, his face grim with concentration. "Williams," he answered, his voice rough with sleep. Nicole tried not to stare at his sleep-mussed hair and the way his chest moved beneath his white t-shirt, but it was a losing battle. Even half awake and tense with anxiety, the man was devastatingly attractive. "What do you mean they're gone?" Richard sat up abruptly, running a hand through his dark hair. "Klaus specifically said they'd have an answer this morning." Nicole's stomach dropped. The investors had left without a word. "Find out where they went," Richard snapped, "and get me Jerome on the line in 10 minutes. He ended the call and stared at the phone like it had personally betrayed him. "They left?" Nicole asked softly. "Sometime before dawn. No message, no explanation." Richard's jaw was tight with barely controlled fury. 5 years of work, and they just disappear. Nicole reached for his hand instinctively, but he pulled away, already getting out of bed. The rejection stung more than it should have. "Maybe they're just thinking it over." "No." Richard was pacing now, his movements sharp and agitated. "Klaus Müller doesn't think things over. He makes decisions and acts on them. If he left without a word, it means the answer is no." The bathroom door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. Nicole stared at the closed door, her heart breaking for him. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd risked, including blackmailing her into this charade, had been for nothing. She was still sitting there in her silk pajamas 20 minutes later when Richard emerged, fully dressed in a dark suit that made him look like he was going to war. "I have to go back to the city," he said without looking at her. "There might be other options, other investors." "Richard." Nicole stood up, clutching her robe around herself. "I'm sorry. I know how much this meant." "Do you?" His voice was cold, distant, the same tone he'd used that first day in his office. "Because from where I'm standing, you get to walk away from this with $500,000 and a clear conscience. Must be nice." The words hit her like a slap. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Nothing about this situation is fair, Nicole. I'm about to lose everything my father built, and you get to go back to your normal life like none of this ever happened. You think I want that?" The words exploded out of her before she could stop them. "You think I'm just counting down the days until I can leave?" Something flickered in Richard's eyes, but he covered it quickly. "Aren't you?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Nicole could lie, could protect herself, could maintain the pretense that this was all just business. Instead, she chose honesty. "No," she whispered, "I'm not." For a moment, Richard's mask slipped entirely. She saw hope, longing, and something that looked dangerously like love in his expression. Then his phone rang, shattering the moment. "Williams," he answered, his voice once again controlled and professional. "What did you find out?" Nicole watched his face change as he listened, going from grim determination to shocked disbelief. "Are you certain?" Richard sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. "Yes, I understand. Thank you, Jerome." He ended the call and stared at the floor for a long moment. "What is it?" Nicole asked, sitting beside him. The investors didn't reject the deal, Richard said slowly, as if he couldn't quite believe the words. They're flying to Munich to prepare the contracts. Klaus was so impressed with our authenticity that he wants to expedite the merger. Nicole's heart soared. Richard, that's amazing. You did it. We did it, he corrected, turning to look at her with an expression she couldn't read. Your performance last night sealed the deal. Klaus specifically mentioned your speech about integrity and family. Performance. The word hit her like cold water. Right. Because that's all it had been to him. A performance. Well, she said, forcing brightness into her voice, I guess that means our contract is fulfilled. You don't need me to pretend to be your wife anymore. Richard's face went carefully blank. No, I suppose I don't. They stared at each other across the suddenly vast distance of the bed, both of them waiting for the other to say something, anything, that might bridge the gap that had opened between them. Neither did. I should pack, Nicole said finally. The helicopter will be ready in an hour. Right, of course. Nicole stood to leave, but Richard's voice stopped her at the door. Nicole, she turned back, hope fluttering in her chest. Thank you. For everything. Thank you. As if she was a business associate who'd done him a favor, not the woman who'd shared his bed for a week, who'd seen him vulnerable and broken, and had chosen to stay anyway. You're welcome, she managed, then fled to the walk-in closet before he could see the tears threatening to spill over. An hour later, Nicole stood in the marble foyer with her single suitcase. Everything else was staying behind, including the beautiful dresses and the ring that still felt heavy on her finger. Keep them, Richard said when she tried to remove it. They suit you. I can't. They're not really mine. Nothing about this was really yours, he said quietly. But you wore them well. Mrs. Henderson appeared with a sealed envelope. Your compensation, Mrs. Williams, she said, with what might have been sympathy. And a small bonus for your exceptional performance. Exceptional performance. Even the housekeeper thought it had all been an act. The helicopter ride back to the city was torture. Richard sat across from her, immaculate in his business suit, every inch the successful billionaire. The vulnerable man she'd glimpsed over the past week might have been a figment of her imagination. When they landed at the private airfield, a town car was waiting to take her home. Richard walked her to the vehicle, every movement careful and controlled. This is goodbye then, he said. Nicole nodded, not trusting her voice. I hope, Richard paused, his composure cracking slightly. I hope you find what you're looking for, Nicole. You deserve to be happy. And you deserve to be loved, she wanted to say. You deserve someone who sees the man behind the money, who knows that you run on the beach at dawn because the nightmares won't let you sleep, who understands that your coldness is just armor protecting a heart that's been broken too many times. Instead, she said, Take care of yourself, Richard. He nodded and stepped back as the driver closed the door. Through the tinted windows, Nicole watched him grow smaller as the car pulled away, his hands in his pockets, looking suddenly alone despite all his wealth and power. She made it exactly 3 blocks before the tears started, back in her tiny apartment, which looked impossibly shabby after a week in Richard's palace. Nicole sat on her second-hand couch and stared at the envelope of money that would change her life. Her mother's surgery was scheduled for tomorrow, paid in full. Her debts would be erased. She could quit her job, go back to school, start over completely. She should have been ecstatic. Instead, she felt like she'd left half her heart on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, with a man who thought their entire relationship had been an elaborate lie. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Surgery went well, honey. Doctor says I'll be dancing at your wedding. When do I get to meet this mysterious new boyfriend you mentioned? Nicole stared at the message and started crying all over again. Because there was no boyfriend. There was just the memory of a man who'd looked at her like she was worth saving, right up until the moment he decided she wasn't worth keeping. Outside her window, the city hummed with life and possibility, but all Nicole could hear was the echo of Richard's voice saying goodbye. 3 weeks. 3 weeks since Nicole had walked away from Seaview Estate, and Richard Williams was slowly losing his mind. He threw himself into work with the kind of desperate intensity that worried even his most ambitious employees. The merger with Muller-Dubois was proceeding flawlessly. Contracts signed, regulatory approvals secured, stock prices soaring. Blackstone Industries was not only saved, but positioned to become a global powerhouse. He should have been celebrating. Instead, he was standing in his corner office at 2 a.m., staring out at the city lights and wondering how victory could feel so much like defeat. "Sir?" Richard turned to find James, his assistant, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. "The quarterly reports you requested," James said, setting a stack of folders on the desk. "And sir, maybe you should go home. You've been here since Monday." "What day is it now?" Richard asked absently. "Thursday, sir. 3 days." He'd been at the office for 3 days straight. No wonder the cleaning crew kept giving him worried looks. "I'll leave soon," Richard lied. James hesitated. "Sir, if I may, is everything all right? You seem different since you returned from Big Sur." "Different?" Richard almost laughed. Different was one word for it. Completely destroyed was more accurate. "I'm fine, James. Just busy." After James left, Richard sank into his leather chair and rubbed his temples. The truth was, nothing felt right without Nicole. The penthouse felt too quiet, his bed too empty, his victories too hollow. He'd saved his father's legacy, but somewhere along the way, he'd lost the only thing that really mattered. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria Ashford. "Darling, Charles and I are hosting a small gathering Saturday. We'd love to see you and that lovely wife of yours. It's been far too long." Richard stared at the message, his chest tightening. He'd been dodging social events for weeks, making excuses about being busy with the merger. How long could he keep that up before people started asking questions? More importantly, how long could he keep pretending that letting Nicole go had been the right choice? His phone rang, interrupting his brooding. Klaus Mueller's name appeared on the screen. "Klaus," Richard answered. "Working late as well?" "Richard, my friend, I have some concerning news. I am in New York on business, and I happened to run into Charles Ashford at the Metropolitan Club." Richard's blood chilled. "Oh?" "He mentioned that he has not seen your wife since that delightful dinner at their home. In fact, he seemed to think she might be ill since you have been declining social invitations." "Shit." Richard closed his eyes, his mind racing for a plausible explanation. "Nicole has been traveling, visiting family." "Ah, I see. Well, Charles also mentioned something interesting. He said that when he called your office yesterday, your assistant mentioned you had been working around the clock since returning from your solo retreat in Big Sur." The word solo hung in the air like an accusation. Richard felt the walls closing in. "Klaus, Richard, I must ask directly, are you still married?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Richard opened his mouth to lie, to spin some story about Nicole being away, but the words wouldn't come. He was tired of lying, tired of pretending, tired of everything except the one person he couldn't have. "No," he said quietly, "I'm not." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for an eternity. "I see," Klaus said finally. "And how long has this been the case?" 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Klaus's voice was dangerously calm. "So you were married when we met, but not when we signed our agreement." "Klaus, I can explain. No explanation is necessary. The marriage was clearly a performance for our benefit. The question is why you felt the need to deceive us about something so fundamental." Richard sank deeper into his chair, watching his life's work crumble around him for the second time in a month. "You made it clear that you wouldn't do business with someone you considered unstable. So you hired an actress to play your wife?" "No, she's not." Richard stopped himself. Nicole wasn't an actress, but how could he explain what she really was? His salvation, his downfall, the woman who'd shown him what love could feel like right before he'd thrown it away. "She's someone I cared about," he said finally. "Someone who deserved better than being used as a prop in my business dealings." "You speak of her in past tense?" "Yes." "Because the arrangement ended, or because your feelings did?" The question caught Richard off guard. What?" "It is a simple question, Richard. Do you still care for this woman?" Richard thought about lying again, but he was so tired of it. "More than I've ever cared about anything," he admitted. "Then why is she not here?" "Because she was never really mine to begin with. The marriage was fake, Klaus. A business arrangement. She played her part perfectly, but it was never real. For her, perhaps," Klaus said thoughtfully. "But what about for you?" The words hit Richard like a revelation. What about for him? When had it stopped being fake? When he'd slipped his grandmother's ring on her finger? When she'd defended him to Klaus with such fierce conviction? When she'd looked at him like he was worth saving? "I don't know," Richard whispered. "Then I suggest you find out," Klaus said. "Because Henri and I have built our partnership on trust and authenticity. We believed we were doing business with a man who had found love and stability. If that was all a lie, Klaus, please, don't pull out of the merger. I'll find a way to make this right. You have 1 week, Klaus said. Either convince me that your feelings for this woman were genuine, or find yourself new investors. Good evening, Richard. The line went dead, leaving Richard staring at his phone in shock. 1 week to prove that his love for Nicole was real. But how could he prove something to Klaus that he'd never even admitted to her? The answer came to him with crystalline clarity. He couldn't, but maybe he could prove it to himself. Richard grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator. For the first time in 3 weeks, he knew exactly where he needed to be. 20 minutes later, Richard stood outside Nicole's apartment building, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was nearly 3 a.m., but her lights were on. Was she awake, or had she simply forgotten to turn them off? There was only one way to find out. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs, his polished dress shoes echoing in the shabby hallway. When he reached her door, he paused, his hand raised to knock. What would he say? That he'd been miserable without her? That he'd realized somewhere between their fake wedding vows and their real goodbye that he'd fallen completely, irrevocably in love with her? That he was standing outside her apartment at 3 a.m. like some lovesick teenager because he couldn't figure out how to live without her? All of that was true, but would she believe him? Before he could lose his nerve, Richard knocked. Footsteps approached the door, and he heard the security chain rattle. Who is it? Nicole's voice was cautious, suspicious. It's me. A long pause. Richard? Yes. Another pause, longer this time. Then the chain rattled again, and the door opened. Nicole stood there in an oversized sweater and leggings, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked tired, older somehow, but still the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. What are you doing here? She asked. Richard opened his mouth to explain about Klaus, about the ultimatum, about the merger hanging in the balance. But looking at her face, guarded, hurt, but still so achingly familiar, only one truth mattered. I made a mistake, he said. The biggest mistake of my life. Nicole's eyes searched his face. What kind of mistake? I let you go. For a moment, she just stared at him. Then she stepped back, opening the door wider. You'd better come in. Nicole's apartment looked smaller with Richard in it, his presence filling the modest space like he was too big, too intense for the second-hand furniture and thrift store decorations. He stood in the middle of her living room, impossibly handsome despite his rumpled shirt and the exhaustion etched across his features. You look terrible, she said, because it was easier than admitting how much seeing him again made her chest ache. I feel terrible, he replied, his honesty catching her off guard. I haven't slept in 3 weeks. The merger keeping you busy? She kept her voice light, casual, even though her heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. The merger's fine. It's everything else that's falling apart. Nicole wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed in her casual clothes. What do you want, Richard? It's 3 a.m. Klaus knows. The words hit her like cold water. Knows what? That we're not married anymore. That we were never really married at all. Richard ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Charles Ashford mentioned to him that he hadn't seen you, that I'd been attending events alone. Klaus put the pieces together. Nicole sank onto her small couch, the implications washing over her. So, the deal is off? Unless I can prove to him that my feelings were real, I have 1 week before he pulls out. And are they? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Real, I mean. Richard's eyes met hers across the room, and for a moment, she saw past all his walls to the vulnerable man underneath. That's what I'm here to figure out. At 3 a.m.? I couldn't sleep. Haven't been able to since... He gestured vaguely between them. Since what, Richard? Nicole stood up, frustration finally overriding her heartbreak. Since our business arrangement ended? Since you got what you needed and I became expendable? No. His voice was sharp, almost desperate. Since I realized I'd been an idiot. About what? About you. About us. About what was real and what was fake. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Nicole, when you defended me to Klaus that night, when you talked about integrity and believing in me, where did that come from? She lifted her chin defiantly. You said it yourself. I'm a good actress. Stop it. Richard closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face. Stop lying to both of us. That wasn't acting, and we both know it. Nicole's breath hitched at his touch, her resolve crumbling. It doesn't matter what it was. You made it clear that it was all just business to you. I was protecting myself, he said softly. I've spent my entire adult life building walls to keep people from getting too close, from having the power to hurt me. And then you came along with your smart mouth and your fierce loyalty, and you bulldozed right through every defense I had. Richard, I fell in love with you, he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. Somewhere between that first dinner with the Ashfords and watching you sleep in my bed, I fell so hard I didn't know which way was up, and it terrified me. Nicole's heart stopped. You, what? I love you, he repeated, his thumbs tracing over her cheekbones. Not the idea of you, not the convenience of you, not the performance. You, the woman who called me on my bullshit from day one. The woman who saw something worth saving in me when I couldn't see it myself. Tears spilled down Nicole's cheeks, and Richard caught them with his thumbs. Then why did you let me go? Because I'm an idiot, he said with a self-deprecating laugh. Because I thought you were just playing a role, that none of it was real for you. Because I was too much of a coward to ask if you might feel the same way. And now? Now I'm still an idiot, but I'm an idiot who's realized that losing my father's company would hurt. But losing you? That would destroy me. Nicole searched his face, looking for any trace of deception, any hint that this was another performance. All she saw was raw, honest emotion, love, hope, and fear, all tangled together. I quit my job, she whispered. Richard blinked, clearly not expecting that. What? The day after I left Seaview, I used part of the money to pay off my debts, saved enough for my mom's follow-up care, and quit that awful job. She managed a watery smile. I'm going back to school. Art therapy. I want to help kids who've been through trauma. Nicole, that's incredible. I figured life's too short to waste it being miserable in a gray cubicle. She took a shaky breath. Especially when I'd just spent a week learning what it felt like to be truly happy. Were you? Richard's voice was barely above a whisper. Happy? Happier than I'd ever been in my life, she admitted. Right up until the moment you said goodbye. Richard's forehead dropped to rest against hers, his eyes closing as if in relief. I'm such an idiot. Yes, Nicole agreed, her hands coming up to grip his shirt. You are, but you're my idiot. Am I? His eyes opened, searching hers. Really? Instead of answering with words, Nicole rose on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, but then Richard's arms came around her waist, and he pulled her closer, deepening the kiss with a desperation that spoke of 3 weeks of longing and regret. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. I love you too, Nicole whispered against his lips. I think I started falling for you the moment you threatened to count down from 15. It should have terrified me, but instead it made me feel alive for the first time in years. Richard's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. So what now? Now you grovel appropriately for being such an emotionally constipated billionaire. I can do groveling. His arms tightened around her. What else? Now you figure out how to prove to Klaus that this is real. I have an idea about that, Richard said, his smile turning mysterious. But it involves a risk. What kind of risk? The kind where I put my heart on the line in front of witnesses and hope like hell you don't change your mind. Nicole raised an eyebrow. Intriguing. Tell me more. Later, Richard said, backing her toward the bedroom. Right now, I have 3 weeks of missing you to make up for. Richard Williams. Are you propositioning me? Nicole Wintz, he said, her name like a caress on his lips. I'm proposing something much more dangerous than that. What? He stopped at her bedroom door, his eyes serious despite the desire burning in them. I'm asking you to take a chance on forever. Real forever, not contract forever. Nicole's heart swelled with so much love she thought it might burst. That is dangerous, she agreed, pulling him into her room. Lucky for you, I've always been a risk-taker. As the door closed behind them, Nicole couldn't help but think that this, Richard's arms around her, his heart open and honest at last, was worth every moment of uncertainty that had brought them here. Outside, the city was beginning to wake up, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was the dawn of something new, something real, something that no contract could ever define or contain. It was love, in all its messy, complicated, beautiful glory, and it was only the beginning. 6 months later, the wedding was small, intimate, and absolutely perfect. Nicole stood on the cliff overlooking the Pacific, wearing a simple white dress and her grandmother-in-law's ring, watching her husband-to-be straighten his tie for the 5th time in as many minutes. "Nervous?" she teased as Richard fiddled with his boutonniere. "Terrified," he admitted. "What if you change your mind?" "I've had 6 months to change my mind. I'm not going anywhere." Klaus Mueller cleared his throat from his position as their officiant, a surprise that had made both Nicole and Richard laugh until they cried. Apparently, the old German had a romantic streak and had insisted on performing the ceremony himself. "Are we ready?" Klaus asked with a twinkle in his eye. Richard looked at Nicole, his expression soft with love and wonder. Ready. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, honest, heartfelt promises that made their small group of guests tear up openly. Victoria Ashford was sobbing into Charles's handkerchief, while Henri Dubois kept muttering magnifique under his breath. But the best part came at the end, when Klaus pronounced them husband and wife, and Richard kissed her like his life depended on it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Klaus announced with satisfaction, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Williams. This time, for real and forever." As their guests cheered and the Pacific waves crashed below them, Nicole couldn't help but laugh at the beautiful irony of it all. She'd started this journey as a fake wife, had her heart broken when it ended, and now here she was, a real wife, with a real marriage, and a real love that would last a lifetime. "What's so funny?" Richard murmured in her ear as they swayed together to the soft music playing from hidden speakers. "Just thinking about contracts," Nicole said, smiling up at him. "Oh? The heart doesn't need one. It just knows." Richard spun her around, his laughter joining hers as it danced on the ocean breeze. "Best contract I never signed." Nicole agreed, pulling him down for another kiss. "Definitely." And as the sun set over Seaview Estate, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Mr. and Mrs. Williams danced on the edge of forever, their hearts finally, truly free. But the end